Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Oregon Fan Show, where our guest this hour is Doug Scott of the QB-11 show. Doug, thanks for coming on. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me on, Dale. It's nice to chat with you.
It's an absolute pleasure. Man, the QB-11 show, you guys average about 3,000 listeners an episode. You told me that before the show. That's
uh,
impressive.
yeah, it's been really humbling, and we're obviously very grateful to our listeners. And that number is average throughout the year. During the season, it'll go up substantially, and then the true hardcores like us, of course, listen all year round. But we're starting to ramp up as we get into preseason and season mode now. So our numbers have already started jumping up here in the last few episodes, and that'll keep happening as we get into the season and through the season.
Well, thanks for coming on this small time minor league program. We love talking college football with great people, and you certainly fit the bill. What do you think has made the show so successful?
Well, first and foremost, it starts with just the product that we're primarily covering, right? The Oregon Ducks football program is had phenomenal success, these last few years, continues to elevate itself under Coach Dan Lanning and Marshall Malkow and the rest of the team there. So we actually started, coincidentally, it wasn't intentional, but we started the podcast the same time Dan kind of took over as head coach or within a couple months of that point. And so it's been a pretty good time to jump into this game and honestly, without the success of the program, interest just the nature of fandom, right? Like the program's not successful, you're not going to have as many people invested in following it. And when the program is extremely successful, like Oregon has been, and rising like Oregon has been, it's a product that more and more people want to listen to. And I think I think we try to do a great job of covering the team in depth, fairly with knowledge, and we'll call balls and strikes. We say things we don't like when Oregon does something we don't like or performs poorly. We'll call it out. We're not the Baghdad Bob, if you will. Everything's perfect, right? But it's been a lot more good than bad. So sometimes we almost have to go the other way, and I'm like, are we being too homeristic? And when I've guest appearance on other shows, I'm like, I'm talking up the Ducks to maybe someone who covers the Big Ten or college football in general, or a fan of another team, and I'm just like, well, we're pretty good here. We're pretty good here. And I'm like, we're not like, I'm not being a homer. We're just really good. Like, it's just, that's so, but you try to find those areas where there's room for improvement. And I think there's some in this year's team too.
It's going to be fun to see how it all comes together. Excitement could not be higher.
For sure. Number two preseason ranking, the highest all time for the Ducks going into a season.
It's impressive. I like what Dan Lanning said yesterday, though. Have you ever? They asked him if he how what he thought if he thought about that preseason ranking, and his answer was short and succinct.
And spot on.
Yes, hell no. Have you ever seen a preseason ranking that was accurate? He knows better than anyone. They've got to earn it on the field. They got to execute, and they've got to be focused, dialed in, cohesive for 25 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Preseason rankings are for fans and for media and for people like us to give us something to talk about. Like players, coaches, people on the team, they ain't got time for that. You haven't won anything yet. You haven't accomplished anything yet. You haven't even kicked off a game yet, right? It all doesn't matter. Like USC, remember what was that 10, 12 years ago? They were number one preseason and they ended up like, what, 6-6 or 7-5 or something. So, like, you got to actually go out there and do it. Whatever people think before the season doesn't matter. It doesn't mean nothing. And Dan Smite.
Just talking points. Your co host, Andrew, is a college football podcast assassin.
Yeah, he's pretty knowledgeable. I'm really lucky to be able to get to do this with him. I think we make a great team. He brings a lot of X's and O's knowledge. He can really watch plays and break them down and dissect players. He learned a lot of that from his dad, who's been a scout for forever. So he grew up kind of sitting in Austin Stadium next to his dad, and his dad kind of breaking down. When he's 10 years old, his dad telling him what to watch for. On a left tackle that's pulling out to on an outside run or a blocking play or what's going on and somebody trying to shed blocks on a defensive side of the ball or something. So he's just ingrained in him and he's really good at that stuff. And yeah, I'm really, really blessed to have him to do this with.
He can break down 22 personnel and schemes and the insides and outs of college football like few people I've enjoyed listening to. It explains where it comes from with his dad. Was his dad a coach or just a very knowledgeable fan?
He was a scout. I mean, he still is a scout. So he does scouting professionally. I don't want to. I don't know if it's my place to say for who or where or when or and all that stuff. But he is. He has worked for a long time as a football scout. So.
Well, that's a background like Bill Belichick. So he's an NFL scout.
Uh, I don't know his full background. I know he scouts football play. I mean, he works professionally as a scout of football players. So
All
I
right.
think he's done work in both the NFL and college. I don't know where he's at now.
Well, we'll leave it to that. And Andrew has definitely used that background to produce a product that's really special that Oregon fans love interacting with. I want to bring up, if I can do this successfully, I want to bring up this conversation, Dante Moore talking to the press yesterday about Marcus Mariota and his influence on him.
You guys will study his film. When you watch his film, what really stands out to you and what do you try to incorporate?
Yeah, Marcus is a special talent. He's been playing the game for a long time. And being able to watch, I mean, we watch his college film, we watch his NFL film. It's just the way he plays the game with his speed. If it's just mentally going through progressions or even using his legs to make plays. And of course, he's loved here and for who he is as a person, but also as a player. And I think the biggest thing with him is just how he is in this world and outside of football, just the way he carries himself, the way he loves his family, the way he is as a father. And I kind of feel like me as a man in life, I just get to learn from him. And we're on the range together, just watching him, hug his daughter and his son and everybody. That just makes me like, he's doing great things in life. I want to follow his footsteps.
That was Bree Amaranthus of Sports Illustrated asking a question at yesterday's press conference. I think there's a lot to dive into there, beginning with Dante Moore's mindset coming into this season.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Marcus and Dante are different players physically, right? Their skill sets are a little bit different. Marcus was much more dual threat. Dante's, more of a pocket passer. Obviously, he's athletic. Like any quarterback who plays in the game in this day and age has to have the requisite level of athleticism and being able to get out and make plays with your feet when you need to. Also, Oregon plays a different offense, right? Like they don't play the same offense they did under Marcus. But I do think what Dante focused in on there is really the highlight. I think of where even though the games are different, even though the offenses are different, like the things, the intangibles and the off-field stuff and the mentality and the mindset of playing quarterback are the things that he can take away from Marcus. And I think that really shows like kind of another level of maturation that Dante's going through. Like last year, I think. He spent a year out learning behind Dylan, learning the offense. As he redshirted that year in 2024, and then obviously last year got to be the full-time starter. Really, obviously outside of the true freshman year at UCLA, but the full-time starter and really taking the reins of that. And I think coming back for this year, having that off season, having that process, like you could just see like mentally, he's probably figuring out a lot. We saw that with Marcus when he came back for his last year, in 2014, like the difference between where he was at as a player on the field between 2013 and 2014 was probably not that much different, but the difference in the mentality and the mindset and the maturation and understanding like how to put it all together in the bigger picture of things throughout the course of a long football season. I think we saw that leap. We saw that leap from Bo Nix when he came back between 2022 and 2023, right? And it's as much the mental side and how you prepare and how you process and how you work with your teammates and your coaches and the rest of the staff more so than any physical talent development, right? Between that. And I think that's the difference in those, when you see those leaps from Marcus 2013 to 14, from Bo 2022 to 2023, and now hopefully from Dante 25 to 26.
You said on the last episode of the QB-11 podcast that you really felt that Marcus is ready to make that leap.
Dante, yeah.
I apologize.
I knew what you meant.
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, it's everything we're hearing and seeing, this offseason, from his coaches, from his teammates, and obviously from himself is showing that. I think obviously the proof's in the pudding. He still has to go out there and do it, right? I think what we saw last year was there was tremendous success throughout. He had a great season, right? One of the top 10 quarterbacks in the country last year. Great season as a full-time starter, first year starter for Oregon. But you saw in those big games, right? In against Indiana both times. And certainly even in the Texas Tech game, that wasn't a great game on his part. I mean, it was a great game on Oregon's defense's part, and the offense did enough, but he missed a lot of opportunities in that game as well, and some of the other tougher games in the season. So he certainly is saying all the right things. I think his teammates and coaches are saying all the right things about the step that he's taken in this offseason. And so I have no reason to believe that he won't have a similar jump that we saw with Bo and we saw with Marcus. But we still got to see it on the field, right? And ultimately, it's going to come down to what does that look like in December and January.
Absolutely. Against teams with equal talent, against teams that can apply the pressure and disguise the pressure, that's where he's got to get better. Those are the games where his numbers have got to improve.
You just got to protect the football first and foremost, right? Like you can't turn it over in those games, because that's can be the difference in a win or a loss, and certainly a close game versus a blowout game, right? So you got to start there. And then we saw in the Tech game and the last Indiana game as well, there were plays to be made on the field that he just didn't make. He was hesitant. He held the ball. He made the wrong read. He didn't trust that the guy was going to come open, even though everything was probably telling him that it was. Like it's almost like he didn't trust himself in some of those big moments, and I think that's what we got to see play out against those teams.
I remember one play in particular. I can't pin down in my mind precisely what it was, but there was a spot in the Indiana game where he took a sack, had a receiver coming open over the middle on a crossing route, probably would have been a chunk play.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there was a couple of those in that game. The one I remember was he took a sack on a play when DeCorian was going to break open, and I think it was clear. What you see with the quarterbacks who have taken that step to that next level, right? They trust it, right? You got to throw the ball before the guy's open, right? Because you know where he is, where his defender is, you don't have safety help or linebacker help in that spot, and you just got to throw it out there and give your guy a chance to make a play. And it's like he kind of double clutched it, right? And I think he had a couple of those in that game. We saw in that fourth down play in the Texas Tech game, right? Like Sadiq was wide open on the seam route, and there was no help back there. It's fourth down. Let it go. Like, what's worse is going to happen? The linebacker who's chasing him is going to make some miraculous play, or the ball's going to hit the dirt. Like, you just got to let it go. And he saw it, but he pulled it down for some reason. So it's like, where's that internal, trust factor going on in his mind in those moments? Now, look, he made a lot of big plays last year too, right? So I don't want to sit here and beat up on him, but I think that's the difference between a title-winning potential season and a semifinal exit.
Making that leap. In his last year at Oregon, Bo Nix had just such an incredible knack for feeling the pressure, knowing where it was coming from, making that little adjustment, making the checks. I think it'll help Dante a lot that he's got Iverson Hooks to run those crossing routes. That can bail out a lot of plays.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where the receiver, where the receiver snap count breaks down, right? Like, what does that depth chart look like? I mean, yeah, Hooks coming in had a big season last year coming out of UAB, but it's a very deep and talented room, right? I mean, presumably you've got DeCorian Moore, Evan Stewart, and Jeremiah McCullen as your three starters. Where does Hooks, I'm sure, will play primarily in the slot, but where does he fit in with that rotation? And then you've got young guys like Gatlin Bear and Jalen Lott who are going to be hard to keep off the field as well. So I don't want to focus in too much on Hooks. I think there's a lot of weapons there that can run a lot. And I think the great thing about the three I think starters that I mentioned is that I think they're all positionally versatile, right? Like, I think Evan, DeCorian can both play inside or out. I think J-Mac probably can as well, and we'll see with the younger guys. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for Coach Merringer and Coach
Ross Douglas.
Thank you, Ross Douglas, to kind of mix and match and get their best guys out there, regardless of maybe traditional position. I think there's a lot of versatility there.
Completely agree. Ross Douglas does a great job of managing a receiver room. At Syracuse, he had 3 guys that either reached 1,000 yards or approached it. I don't know if Oregon will throw the ball that much because they've got a great running game too, but he has Douglas has a real gift for using the whole room and involving a variety of guys and having them, as you say, to have not only the position versatility, but just the using that depth of talent, keeping everybody involved.
Yeah, it's one of the big things I'm interested to see this year with the rotation at the receiver room, because one thing we saw with Junior when he was here as the coach is they never really went more than 4 deep, and some of that was lack of depth or earlier in his years. But you looked at the last couple of years Junior was here, there was certainly no shortage of talent in the room that really didn't play a couple of those last couple of years under Junior, and he seemed pretty locked into having a tight rotation of 4 guys. Last year, we didn't really get to see what Douglas would have done because there were so much injuries at the position that, Evan was out the whole year. Dante went out mid-year. Gary Bryant went out. Like it was just the walking wounded there. So I think, you don't know what his depth chart would have looked like, had those guys stayed healthy. So I think this year we'll hopefully get to see, is he going to go 5? Is he going to go 6? Where's the rotation kind of stop, outside of garbage time, obviously.
How long have you been a Duck fan, Doug?
Oh, 40 years. Yeah, probably
40.
started in the mid 80s. So long time.
So you've seen some of the heartbreak, some of the frustration.
Lived it all, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it always seems like in the postseason at playoff time, the Ducks just get this snake bit, we're not at our best thing that happens. And it feels to me like we're due for a little good luck. Where we have our best guys and our main guys and the best version of the Oregon Ducks ready for that big, big game.
Yeah, it's frustrating because like you look and you think, how many plays do you have to flip the outcome of a single play to go from 0 national titles to 3 or even 4, right? And it's a small number, right? You go back to 2007. If Dennis Dixon doesn't blow out his knee, that's 1 play. Does that team win a title? That was a wide open year, right? They were in that number 2 slot before he goes down. You go to 2010, right? Like they obviously lose the national championship game. The fumble 6 that Cam Newton fumbled the ball. Oregon picked it up, scooped and scored it, and they called him down, in the grasp. Like that's a play that I 9 times out of 10 that ball is live and the guy gets to score it in. You flip the result of that play. You call Dyer down. Like does that outcome? Do you have a national title just based on that? Go to 2012. DeAnthony gets a block on that opening drive, or they don't overturn the Zach Ertz non-touchdown into a touchdown in the end zone. Does Oregon win that game and then clean up Notre Dame in the national title game? Right, there's 3 title potential right there on 3 plays. You change 3 plays and you potentially have 3 national titles, and that doesn't even count 2014 or last year or 2024. If you're still in a 4-team playoff in 2024 instead of being the first team in a 12-team playoff, do you win a title because Ohio State's not in that field? And you're going up against, Notre Dame and Georgia, and I don't know who the 4th team would have been, but, it's the margins between no national titles and 3 to 5 are so small. And that's the heartbreak part that you talk about, right? Like, it's not just like, oh, we were close, we had a good year. Okay, last year, yeah, we got beat by a better team. That wasn't a coin flip to winning another title. Right, but all those other things I just talked about were essentially a 1-play or a 2-play situation, and last year maybe you come back to the fact that we entered that game with 2 coaches who were halfway out the door at coordinator positions. We were playing our 6th running back because everyone else was either hurt or in the portal, and our wide receiver situation. Right, does that game? Now I'm not going to sit here and say Oregon wins if those things aren't there, but you never know. Game flow is weird, right? Like sometimes fans, especially when they're like fans of opposing teams and want to clown on you, they're like, oh, you lost by 30, it wasn't close. It's like, yeah, but games have a flow to them, right? And I always call it the snowball effect, right? Like a boulder at the bottom of the hill doesn't start as a boulder; it starts as a tiny snowball, and sometimes games go that way. And then I think both of Oregon's exits in the last two playoffs were what I would call snowball games, right? I mean, you throw the pick six on the first play of the game, then you get it back, right, and then you get the funky fumble because your running back bumped your quarterback's arm, right? I mean, it's just weird. And then all of a sudden it's 21-0, and well, okay, the game, everything's different at that point, right? No one's playing their normal game plan anymore. So it's frustrating, it's disappointing. I just hope one day to see us break through and get that monkey off the back.
Is this the year that happens?
I mean, it's certainly, why not? I mean, it's as good a chance as any. Like, I mean, you go back, like, obviously the years we talked about were there for the taking. But I mean, Oregon's got as good of a roster as anybody in the sport. They're as deep and as talented as anybody in the sport. They're obviously highly regarded. I think there's 7 teams that can win the national title this year. And I think, it's hard. It's harder than it ever was. It's not like the old days where you just run through your conference schedule, you get some patsy in a bowl game, and you get declared champions because somebody voted you champions, right? Like, it doesn't work. Or half champions because the AP went one way and the coaches poll went another way, and the 2 best teams never played. Like, it's not like that garbage. You got to win 4 games against top 10 teams in a row, whether that be the conference title game and 3 playoff games or 4 playoff games. It's 4 top 10 teams you got to beat back to back to back to back to back. It's hard. Like, it's hard. Can it be this year? Of course it can be this year. Will it be? I mean, time will tell. I certainly hope so.
Do you think Dan Lanning has learned the right lessons from those failures?
I mean, we'll see, right? I don't necessarily know that. I know, like, people want to put a lot of stock at going back a year before to, like, some of the 4th down decisions. Like, I mean, I've defended most of his 4th down decisions over the years, right? Like, I think most of them are the correct decision to make, right? Hindsight's 2020, right? I think the one I would probably take back would have been the halftime, end of halftime, first half field goal, not going for the field goal in Husky Stadium when you got the turnover there late in the first half. You should have kicked that field goal. I think the other ones in that game were all the right decision. I think most of his other 4th down calls are the right decision. If you want to go macro on the 2 playoff losses, again, like, what were the things he needed to learn? Not have your coordinators both be taking new jobs? Like, that's not something to learn. Like, maybe the learning point is you just let them go and you roll with in-house and get the distraction out the door. Now, hopefully we won't be in that situation come playoff time this year with 2 new coordinators. But maybe that's what he learns. But that's also kind of it is what it is situation. You can't really control for that. I think we won't know. We don't know. But I think, to me, one of my big frustrations with the current playoff format is the 4-week layoff that your top 4 seeds have. I don't think it's conducive to playing your best ball. I think, I think it's a disadvantage, and you're giving the top teams a disadvantaged road in the playoffs, and it's never made sense to me. It's what I don't like about this format. Indiana's the only one of the 8 teams with a bye that's won their first game. It's 1-7, right? And I don't think that's a coincidence. Now, some of that's coincidence the first year because of Boise and Arizona State, but the other 5, those teams were all favored teams. They were all the higher team, including Oregon, and they all of them started slow. They all started slow, and I think that's indicative of that long layoff. So I think the learning point there is, how do you prepare differently if you have that long layoff this year? How do you prepare differently in that 4 weeks than maybe you did in 2024? And I think Dan talked about that in between 2024 and 2025, right? I think they changed up what they would do in that scenario. Obviously, they got the home game, so they didn't have to do that again, but I assume he'll learn from that the next time around as well. And I guess not run into a buzzsaw that's ranked lower than, I mean, like, that was the other thing with the 2024 season, right? Like, the whole weird seeding and having Boise at the 3 seed, which is absurd, and Ohio State ranked 8th, to play the number 1 team. It was an absurd anomaly that won't ever happen again. So what are you going to do?
Maybe this time they can be the buzzsaw instead of run into the buzzsaw.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were the buzzsaw in that Texas Tech game, right? So
absolutely.
Carry it on. Yeah.
That's one thing that always bugs me, Doug. Folks always from other places around the Big Ten around the nation say Oregon can't win the big games. Dan Lanning can't win the big games. What the hell was the Orange Bowl? That was a big game. That was number 4 Texas Tech scoring 43 points a game, and they throttled him.
Yeah.
They shut him out.
Or the Big Ten title game the year before, or Ohio State in Autzen Stadium that same year. Like those were all big. It's funny, like whenever anyone says Oregon Landing doesn't win the big game, they only pull up the list of games that he lost.
Yeah.
They never pull up the big games that he's won, right? And so look, they're big games because they're hard. They can go either way. Right now, obviously, you know, there's a difference between losing to Ohio State in a walk-off field goal or getting your doors blown off. So I think there's fair criticism there. And I don't necessarily think there's a pattern that between those two games. I think there are very different circumstances between the Ohio State loss in 24 and the Indiana loss in 25. Now, if Oregon were to exit this year losing by 30 again, then I think we have a real conversation we're going to have in the offseason. But I don't necessarily have any reason to believe that's just other than two unrelated events and you know, whatever. Or I do fight back sometimes on some of these fan narratives, but you also try to put in perspective it's just fans being fans.
True enough. I mean, the man is 48-8. His winning percentage ranks between Frank Lehigh and Urban Meyer, for God's sake, and he's 40 years old. He's on the right track. He's developed a culture and a program that's going to be successful for a long while. Some of those narratives, just as you said, they are strictly fan narratives.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you look at the people who cover this sport and are knowledgeable, whether they be on TV or a podcast, you look at other coaches, you look at people in the sport, they all know. Like they all have Dan ranked as very highly as a coach and all hold him in pretty high regard. They know what they're talking about. I'll take that over, you know, some USC or Washington or Texas fan who, you know, is trying to score some cheap points online.
Some hunk. There are too many hunks out there.
I mean, that's the thing about, we all have a voice now, right? And
yeah.
But, you know, I think it's the responsibility of all of us as individuals to decide whose voice is worth listening to and who you put on mute, maybe.
Well, there is one thing I do wonder about. Kurt Signetti, on one of the many wonderful things he did to engineer a 16-0 season is he had a real masterful ability to pace his team and taper off and be intact and healthy and ready to play their best ball in December and January. Jackson Powers Johnson once said that Dan Lanning is so intense that he gets fired up for a Tuesday practice. And I love that about him. I love that intensity. I love that drive, that focused intelligence he brings to coaching football and teaching a team. But I wonder maybe if we don't get to see practice. I wonder maybe if he needs to learn the skill of dialing it down once in a while, of bringing these guys into the playoffs, especially the later rounds of the playoffs, a little more intact, a little more with a little more gas in the tank.
Yeah, I mean, they call it Bloody Tuesday for a reason, right? He brought that over from Georgia. I think they brought that over from Bama, right? So the Tuesday is the meat grinder practice day during the regular, you know, bulk of the season, right? So is there something to be said? And obviously I'm not at practices either, right? But is there something to be said for as the season wears on, maybe you tone that down as you get deep into the season, and maybe they do, for all we know, right? Like, I mean, if you look at the injuries that happened, I mean, it's football, there's going to be injuries, right? But if you look at the injuries that happened between the Orange Bowl and the Peach Bowl last year, I think most of them were in games, right? Like Jordan Davison got hurt in the Texas Tech game. I think Noah Whittington got hurt either in that game or the one before, right? So it is, you know, you can only be preventative too much, right? And where's the line between, you don't want to end up like a Lincoln Riley team where you're too soft, right? You're not ready for combat, right? Because it is combat when you get on when you line it up and get on in the field on Saturday. So there's a line between you got to, as Dan always says, you got to play football to get better at football, right? And you got to hit and you got to do all that stuff. So, but there's probably a balancing act, and I know the way that they self-scout and the way that they reevaluate everything they do operationally, not just, season to season, but certainly, week to week to week. I'm sure they're looking at all that stuff too. So I trust that if those, adjustments need to be made, that they're going to make them.
I know that he in the off season has studied rematches,
Yeah.
and studied the way NFL teams manage the roster for a long season. That's one of the things I really appreciate about Coach Lanning as a coach is his ability to self-evaluate and be critical and look for what's next and what's better.
Yeah, the rematches is a good point, right? You go back to 2023, the Washington rematch of the Pac-12 title game. They performed worse at the beginning of that game than they had in the first game. Ohio State in 2024, they performed worse at the beginning of that game than they had in the first game. Indiana last year, they performed worse at the beginning of that game than they did in the first game. So what is that pattern? What is it that Oregon, I have some personal opinions maybe, but I'm not the expert that the coaches are, right? So I'm glad that they're studying that. I'm glad that they're trying to figure out. I think what I've seen is, game plan wise, Oregon seems to have come into those games with basically the same game plan or a similar game plan. I'm not going to sit there and say they just recycled the same game plan, right? But I also don't think they, what you could see from watching the game was that they didn't really, and I would say if there's a criticism of Oregon, certainly defensively under Tosh, the last 4 years, is they don't really surprise you with what they're going to do, right? They line up, you know exactly what look they're in, and you know exactly what they're going to do. You may not know what they're blitzing or not blitzing or where the blitz is coming from or whatever, but schematically they tend to kind of show their cards, right? And I think that is something that maybe in the rematches is giving the opponent in those situations a better opportunity to scheme new things to go against what they've seen the first time around. That's a theory.
It's a reasonable theory, and it'll be tested this season. Bold statement. Tell me if you agree or disagree. Chris Hampton will scheme football better, especially in big games, than Tosh Lupoy.
I agree with that. I love Tosh. I think he is a great recruiter. He's a great relationship builder. He's a great motivator. I think he's a great developer of talent, right? All of those things are fantastic. I said this, I think, on our show. I think he is going to be a better head coach than he was a coordinator, because I think his strengths play more into the things that are beneficial to being either a position coach or a head coach, and not necessarily the schematic things about being a coordinator. So, and obviously Hampton has a coordinator experience, from Tulane before he came over to Oregon, and I think he is more of a schematic guy. So I do think there's a real likelihood that we'll see an improvement there under Hampton than we did under Tosh. Now, some of that also is the talent continues to get better. Some of that also maybe Dan, allowing that to happen more. So I don't want to put it all on Tosh or whatever, but I do think that Oregon under Hampton will be a less predictable team to attack, for other offenses to attack.
And as you pointed out, it's pretty easy, or much easier, to look good as a defensive coordinator when you have Bear Alexander, Amari Washington, Mateo Uiagalelei, and Tatum Tuioti coming back for their senior years with steel in their eyes.
Absolutely. I mean, that was obviously a huge coup. I remember when after the season, when Bear came out first and said he was coming back, and then it was Amari, and then it was like boom, 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 those dominoes fell, and obviously the next thing turned to all the backups, kind of transferring out, and I think it speaks, to the nature of the current game, right? Like you have a limited budget, and also those guys, those backups, they want to play. They've put in their time, they've earned it, and if those frontline guys have all gone to the NFL, then I'm sure all those backup guys that left are still here, and there are starters this year. But once, there's a lot of fans who are like, oh no, this guy's left. I'm like, yeah, but you got to pick or choose. You can't have it all anymore, right? And those guys got 7-figure paydays to go play at Notre Dame, at Alabama. I mean, these guys are going to high-end programs. Our backups are going to be starters at high-end programs, which I think tells you a lot about the depth of talent that has been built here and that is still being built here and developed here, but also just how good those frontline guys are.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? Oregon players going to Notre Dame, Ole Miss, and Alabama to become starters. Backups at Oregon going to those schools to become starters.
Well, and you look back even just 3-4 years when Dan first got here, we were taking backups from Alabama to be our starters.
Yeah.
And now we're sending our backups to be their starters, obviously on a limited basis. But the point remains, like, that just shows you how much the roster has been elevated, 1 through 100 under the staff. Like it really is as talented as any roster in the country.
Everybody talks about the Nike money and how much money Oregon spends. But I look at the 2027 recruiting class. Ducks have players from 17 different states, and in many cases, the best players in those states. That is a testament not only to the Nike money, but to evaluation, scouting, relationship building, drive. There's a lot more to Oregon's success than the money.
Yeah, the money's, again, it's an easy thing for fan bases to harp on, right? But like, guess what? Ohio State's got money, Texas got money, Georgia, like all these schools, Notre Dame, all these schools are spending money too, right? USC obviously spending money too, right? So it's, yeah, in this, I mean, it is what it is. Like, don't be ashamed of it. Like, we're in the era of NIL and revenue sharing and paying players, and you got 10, $40 million rosters in the sport. And Oregon is fortunate enough to be a program that's well funded to be able to have one of those 40 million-ish rosters. But you still got to spend it wisely, and you still got to develop those guys, and you got to put them in the right position. You got to coach them up, and you got to have the right schematics, and you got to have the right culture. Like, people don't talk about that enough, right? Like, you can't just throw 100 random guys on a team. You got to build that culture, right? And we've seen Oregon building that culture here, right? You look at Signetti last year at Indiana. Like there's a huge culture component to their success. So I think Oregon's done a great job of spending those resources wisely. And look, they're not winning every battle. They're losing plenty of recruiting battles. They didn't get Jordan Seaton in the portal this year. Like USC, took a lot of guys in the last couple cycles that Oregon was looking for in Southern California too. So, it's not just a matter of like, we're going to come in and throw the biggest check. Like, no, I think they're very smart about how they spend their money. They're very disciplined. They clearly spend way more of it on retention, which I think is the right call, right? They're rewarding the guys that are here and performing. And because of that, as Dan is very proud to point out, they've never lost a starter to the portal that they wanted to keep. So I think that speaks volumes about how they're prioritizing their spend too. And I think that's why they lose some of those recruiting battles, because other schools are going to, pay their freshmen 3 times more than they're paying their existing players. And that's going to lead to locker room trouble if you keep that up. And so I think Oregon is smartly avoiding that. Yeah.
Another exciting thing about this group is the roster balance. They not only have talent, they have talent all over.
Yeah.
They have talent in the second unit. Marshall Malco, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Has done a tremendous job. He's got a plan, a comprehensive plan for what the roster should look like and what the traits should be.
Yeah, absolutely. He's one of the best in the business. He was obviously doing this at Texas A&M before coming here. I know he worked with Dan at Georgia, and he's been at a lot of other places with Dan as well. So he's really good at this. He's got a great staff there as well, who really do a great job of scouting first and foremost, but also then it is about balancing the roster, right? And it's why you had to see some of those second line defensive line guys move on, because like you have a dollar allocation. You've got a budget. Nobody does. Every school has a budget. Nobody has this unlimited budget, right? And also the budget also becomes one of your culture and of the health of your locker room, right? Because you can't just throw money willy nilly, because guys talk. They know what other guys are making, and you've got to be smart with it. So you've got a budget for your room, and if you're paying all your NFL guys to come back another year, that means you got to let the other guys go, because you can't match their budget, and they probably want to play more anyway. And so then you have your budget at the other positions you spend on. So I think they're really, really smart about not just the numbers that they're used to be in the old days. You'd say, okay, we want we want 16 offensive linemen and we want 11 wide receivers, and, whatnot. Now it's like you have that, but you also have, here's our dollar number for that room. So the more you're spending on the top guy in that room, the less you have to go down that list, right? But it's some of that's all about, okay, you get young guys in, you get them on whatever their opening salary is, but then they have a chance to get raises as they earn time and produce.
Even with the losses in the second unit, I'm incredibly excited about the second unit that they have. I look at the body composition and the achievements in the weight room for Matthew Johnson, Aiden Breland, Anthony Jones, two of them. Oregon's so deep, they've got two Anthony Joneses.
And two Devin Jacksons.
Yeah. And all four of those guys are good players, above the line players.
Yeah, they certainly have an opportunity to be. I'm with you on the. I mean, I think there was a lot of angst when all of the second unit defensive linemen left. But as you get through spring, you start hearing things, and then you see the spring game, and you're like, okay. So I think you got Matthew Johnson, who's ready to play as a year two guy, right? Huge, awesome. You bring in DeAndre Robinson from North Carolina, who's going to fill a need there at the nose position, which I think is incredible. I think they have another couple of depth transfers they bought as well. They're probably like, situational players or depth players in that unit. But then, yeah, you've got Aiden Breland, who last year was a really good interior pass rusher. And now he's a guy that, can he be an every down player? And you're going to get to find that out. I think he can. I think he's, by all indications, we're seeing that he's developed that skill set to be not just an interior pass rusher on third down, but a guy who can give you run stopping ability on your standard downs as well. And I think Matt Johnson obviously is another guy in that category, but he also gives you some dynamic pass rushing. So on the interior, and then surprisingly, you've got some guys who came in maybe as perceived edge players and defensive ends, who, like a Tank Jones, who's a true freshman out of Alabama, 5-star, that looks like he's going to be playing mostly inside this year. I think partly that's just his body, right? He's just massive. He's putting on weight, but it's not bad weight, right? He's just got the frame to carry more weight, but still be an explosive, dynamic player. Well, that's a freakazoid, right? If you can have an interior guy who's weighing in at 290, 295, but he has the athletic skills associated more with a defensive end or edge player, sign me up for that, right? And so he's a guy, and I think it's also a testament to his ability or willingness to do what's best for the team, right? He's a true freshman, 5-star. He didn't come in and I'm the big man on campus. He's like, hey, how can I help the team? Okay, here's how I can get on the field as a true freshman, because it's going to be hard to break that rotation at edge between Mateo and Tatum and Nasir Wyatt coming back, and maybe Elijah Rushing playing the big end spot out there, right? But I can get on the field, in this kind of, outside, kind of 3-4 tech guy, 5 tech guy. So it's a testament to his willingness to help the team, but also just his body and what a freak athlete he is.
Tank Jones changed himself from a Panzer to an Abrams tank in the offseason. The dedication that it took to apply yourself to the nutrition program and the weight program under Wilson Love, to go from 6'4", 245-ish to 6'4", 295, 300, that's insane. That's work.
Yeah, and I usually take kind of weights. You gotta add some grain of salt to him, right? Like he was probably already bigger than 245 before he got here, right? They probably had him underlisted in high school or in the recruiting services, and then he was probably I know Coach Tuioti said he was 300. Well, that could be 290, and he's rounding, right? Like so, some of that's a little bit of like football weights, right? But no, you're not wrong otherwise.
Well, Doug, we're the Oregon fan show. We totally buy into the hyperbole. We're not a careful analysis show like yours.
16-0 national champs. Let's go.
Exactly. We buy into it. We've got the Ted Lasso Believe sign up. It's going to be up tomorrow. That's the way we look at it. The other thing I've got to shout him out for is the fact that here's a kid. The NFL took 17 edge rushers in the first and second round this year. So he has a chance with the talent he has to develop into an NFL edge rusher. Now, he's a long way from being there yet, but to make the sacrifice, hey, the team needs me to move inside, be able to play the 3 technique. We want you to hit the weight room and get bigger. And for him to just say, okay, coach, I'll do it. That's cool.
It is. It also speaks to, I mean, who knows where he'll end up, 2-3 years down the line.
True.
Maybe it's a temporary move and he sheds weight and moves back outside a little more, next year or something as needs on the team change. But I think there's also what you see in the NFL is if you can have those type of freakazoids that can play at 300 but have the twitch and athleticism and burst of an edge player, those guys are making bank. Those guys are worth their weight in gold. So I think if you're a freak athlete on the front, the NFL is going to find a home for you.
Amari Washington and Devin Jackson both made the Feldman's freaks list, but Oregon's probably has 6 to 8 guys who would be on the next 20 of the freaks list.
Yeah, the freaks list is a lot of fun, and I love it. And I get, the thing I think about with that is when you're putting out stuff like that, you're trying to be egalitarian, right? Like you're trying to cover a large swath of the country, find guys that some smaller programs. You're trying, because in reality, if you were to stack up the 100 freakiest athletes in the country, the vast majority of it would probably be at 10 schools, right? But it's not really fun to have a list where you've got 10 guys from Oregon and 10 guys from Ohio State and 10 guys from Georgia and 10 guys from Texas, right? That's probably reality, but that's not very fun. And so, you got to spread the love around a little bit, and you'll pick a couple of guys here and there. And there's freak athletes everywhere. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that players on that list aren't deserving of being on that list, but to your point, there's a lot of freak athletes on this team beyond just those two.
They once asked Stone Cold Steve Austin why he smashed 2 cans of beer together rather than just sipping the beer or drinking the beer. And he said, it's a show. And Feldman's freak list is a show. You gotta be a little bit of a showman.
Yeah, absolutely. And college football does a lot of those things throughout the year. And look, you just understand what the purpose of those things are. The purpose is not to give you a scientific list of the 100 most athletic freaks in the country. The purpose is to give you a cross section of interesting and unique play. I mean, they picked a walk-on from Ohio State or something that probably is not going to play, but he's a freak, and it's a fun story, and it's great, right? And it drew a lot of buzz, right? So that's what it's about.
Well, I really appreciate you, Doug, because you're full of knowledge and you also make distinctions. Sometimes I get carried away with my enthusiasm, and I'm not as careful about that part of it. So that's why I appreciate having you on. Let me ask you this. Earlier in the show, you said that there were 7 legit national championship contenders. Who are they?
Yeah, I think they're the top 7 teams in the AP ranking, right? So I think you put them in whatever order you want. I said this when the poll came out. Like, they put those 7 in whatever order you want. They're the right 7, and I think the national championship will come from that group. So it's Oregon, it's Ohio State, it's Indiana from the Big Ten, it's Texas and Georgia from the SEC, and it's Miami and Notre Dame. Those are your 7.
There are some super interesting playoff matches for the Ducks in that list.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, how many times have we almost gotten but not gotten the Alabama? I mean, Alabama's not in that list, but almost gotten but not gotten the Alabama matchup over the years, and that one would be fun, not on that list. But obviously, the Mario Cristobal one, Miami one, is the first and foremost one that comes to your mind. Old coach versus current coach. The Miami fan base is just one of the most hilarious, but also mind-numbingly frustrating fan bases to follow online, because they're still convinced to this day that every single player on Oregon's roster was somehow the product of Mario Cristobal. And not to mention over the last 3 years, but even now, and it's like, well, actually, I've tweeted at this a number of times over the last couple of years. Like, even last year, I think it was 6 was the number left over for Mario. The year before it was 13. So like those last 2 playoff teams had almost no Mario influence on them at all. And even the 23 team, the last year of the Pac-12 was like 22 guys, I think, and a couple of those were special teamers and backups. So it's been Dan, like 22, sure. Dan's first year, he rolled with Mario's roster, and then he cleaned house. And from 23 on, it's been 85% Dan's team, and now it's 100% Dan's team. And even last year it was 95, 98% Dan's team. So it's a funny fan base, but you'd have all the Mario Cristobal circus and the fans and all of that on both sides. It's funny, you got a lot of Oregon fans who still want to be all mad at Mario for the way he left, and I'm just like, okay, we ended up in a better off place, so why are we unhappy about it, right? And then you got Miami fans who somehow feel this weird need to have their coach be better than our coach. I don't know why. You're happy with your guy, be happy with your guy. But that's a fun one. You mentioned some others. Obviously, Notre Dame. I mean, Oregon's played Notre Dame once, and it was, God, forever ago, 30, 40 years ago. So that would be a fun one because it's Notre Dame. Like, wouldn't that be cool? And then and also you've got the Freeman and Lanning, comp is very similar, right? They both took over at the same time. They both have upped the recruiting profile of their teams, which were already recruiting well. They're both young, energetic, new style head coaches. There's a ton of parallels there, and so that would be a fun one to watch as well. I'm trying to think who else is on that list. Obviously, Indiana and Ohio State for the payback purposes, and the Big Ten stuff as well would be big ones there. So there's a lot of fun, and then Georgia, obviously, like Kirby versus Dan. Like, we saw how that went the first time, but like, let's see a different matchup now that Dan's in year 5 and Oregon's roster is in a completely different place than it was 5 years ago. So I think the only one I didn't list then is the Texas game, which it's Texas. Who doesn't want to beat Texas?
Good old
Horns down.
Yes, good old 9-win Sark.
Yeah, 9-win Sark. Yeah, it used to be 7-win Sark for a while when he was at Washington, and I think he upped it to 9-win Sark at Texas for a while. Yeah,
A lot of Oregon fans, are touchy about Mario, but I look at it, I think similar to the way you do, that he helped elevate the program, got it to a much better place than it was. He elevated the recruiting, made Oregon a national recruiting power again, and then he went home. I can't hate on the guy for that.
No, I think you could have quibbled maybe at the way it went down. It kind of derailed, the 2021 season, and so that was unfortunate. Like how distracted was he, and therefore the team kind of down the stretch run of that year, the wheels kind of fell off. So you can be frustrated about that, and maybe the I don't want to say dishonesty, but lack of transparency about what he was doing and whatnot. He certainly handled it better than Willie did the year before, but
oh God.
But it's also a situation where it's hard to have a good exit in that scenario, right? Like how do you, if you're going to take the job and go home, but you have to do this in the run up to a conference title game and potentially something beyond, like how do you do that? What's the right way to do that? Like, I don't know that there is one. It's just the bad timing of the college football calendar leads to putting guys in that situation in a no-win scenario. So we can quibble on how he handled it or didn't handle it well. That season was one of the more frustrating ones in Oregon memory for different reasons beyond how he exited, or certainly additional reasons beyond how he exited. But yeah, I can't hate on him for what he did. And ultimately, like you said, he elevated the program. He left it in a way better place than where it was before. And I think he proved to Oregon fans, Oregon donors, Oregon leaders that you can recruit at a top level to the University of Oregon. And so I don't think we have what we have now if Mario didn't come along and prove that proof of concept. Now, Dan's taken it and elevated it to a whole new level, and we can argue about how much NIL factored into that or didn't factor in it. It's not, we'll never know. But the foundation was set, during Mario's tenure for sure.
The egregious myth that Miami fans keep trying to advance is that Dan Lanning inherited a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or put in whatever expensive car you want from Mario Cristobal. In Mario's last 2 years, the Ducks were 4-3 and 10-4. This was a team that was not quite there yet, and Lanning has taken it to an entirely new level.
Yeah, and I talked about this earlier, and I'll just to touch a little more. I mean, I'm not going to count anything with 2020 COVID season as meaning anything, so I'll just throw that one out. But yeah, you're right about 2021. I think more importantly, if you look at the roster and the actual players, right, and you go through like, okay, Mario had these recruiting classes in the 2021 and 2020 classes that look really good on paper, right? But you actually go through and look at how those classes panned out. they weren't nearly as good as they looked on paper. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. COVID evaluations. Some guys just, I mean, nobody has a 100% hit rate, right? Some guys don't develop as well as others. But the reality that leads to is that it wasn't a Lamborghini. Most of the guys in those classes did not become starting caliber college football players, let alone high caliber. I mean, a couple did, and a couple did at Oregon. But the vast majority of them, when they transferred out, whether they transferred out when Mario left or whether they transferred out 1 year later when Dan cleaned house after 2022, where did they transfer to? They didn't go to Alabama and Notre Dame and Ole Miss to become starters. They went to lower level power programs. They went to G6 programs. They went to FCS programs. They went to nowhere. And most of them did not turn into high caliber players. They turned into career backups or guys that didn't even really get on the field much at all. So the myth is that it was a Lamborghini, right? It was, maybe that just speaks more to the fact that those last couple teams under Mario, especially that 2021, I mean, maybe it outperformed what it actually had, right? You can say 10-4 was disappointing, but if you look at the players that were on that roster, maybe they got the most out of it.
Last question, Doug. Fill in the blank. Oregon wins a national championship this year if
Dante Moore takes the Mariota Bo Nix leap from their second to last season to their last season. Yeah, if he takes that leap, Oregon will win the title this year.
Fully agree. It's going to be fun to watch it all unfold and to watch it on Ducks versus them all year.
Absolutely. Love those.
Oh, yeah. Doug, you've been so generous with your time. I appreciate you. It was a fun conversation, and I'm looking forward to diving in deeper into the QB-11 podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun. You really teed up a lot of great conversation starter questions. Obviously, you're really skilled at what you do. And so hopefully I was able to provide great answers off the cuff. I really enjoyed the conversation. I felt like we could have gone another hour.
Well, let's do that. Let's schedule another hour for the first week of September or down the road a bit.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, hit me up anytime.
Outstanding. Thank you again, Doug Scott. Folks, the information about QB-11 will be on the crawl all day. We like to feature our guests on this show. We don't do the whole like and subscribe thing here. We like to make our guests feel welcome. Thanks again. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.